If you want to develop a smooth, efficient one-handed backhand, you need to understand how to use your kinetic chain properly. And if we look at how the best players in the world use their kinetic chain on the one-handed backhand, you'll see it always starts with a fast, effective preparation where they coil their upper body and they load their legs, especially the back or outside hip. This allows them to store energy in their upper body and energy in the big muscles of the leg that can then be used to initiate the forward swing. The exact amount of upper body coil varies from player to player and dependent on the shot that they're hitting, but you'll see from a lot of top players that they rotate their upper body so much that you can see their back from down the other end of the court. This enables them to have more space and more room to create racket head speed as they use their kinetic chain. As they do the unit turn, they'll take their racket into an upward position around or above head height. This enables them to get a small assist from gravity when initiating the swing, but more importantly, it provides increased room and increased space to create racket head speed. So it serves a similar purpose as the increased rotation of the upper body. They'll then initiate the forward swing by driving the back leg into the ground, and immediately after the leg drive, they'll start to lower the racket into the slot position. And for most professional players, you'll see the strings pointing towards the back of the court. This is an active process where the non-dominant hand is still on the throat of the racket. Then roughly as the racket reaches the slot position, they'll let go with the non-dominant hand. The torso will start to rotate, and as the torso rotates, it rapidly stretches the back muscles and the muscles on the back of the shoulder to activate the stretch reflex, enabling a more powerful contraction that then allows them to very quickly propel the arm and the racket through to contact with the ball. This part of the one-handed backhand is the equivalent of the racket lag on the forehand, and it's a really important part of efficiently generating power. So the smoothness of the one-handed backhand and the efficient generation of power comes from the very precise sequencing of the kinetic chain, driving through the back hip, combined with the racket drop immediately followed by the torso rotation, which creates that stretch reflex, and then the powerful contraction which throws the racket through to the ball. So in order to have an efficient backhand, it all has to be timed very precisely, and it has to be timed in relationship to the flight of the ball. Timing is always one of the most important parts of the shot, but on the one-handed backhand, it's even more important because when you're hitting a forehand or a two-handed backhand, you can compensate if you're a little bit late, but this isn't possible on the one-handed backhand, so the timing relative to the flight of the ball is even more important than for the other shots. And it's this timing component that's often the biggest hurdle that prevents players from developing a smooth one-handed backhand. I find that most players are obsessing and focusing on the precise swing path, but normally the issue relates to the timing. Often players are starting their swing too late, and because they're starting their swing too late, it prevents them from sequencing their kinetic chain and using optimal biomechanics. Now, the first reason that players can start their swing late comes down to late preparation. It is very common for players to not prepare quickly enough, and because they're not loaded and set up in position quickly enough, it then causes them to start their swing late. So if you're struggling to develop a smooth one-handed backhand, you want to record yourself to find out whether you're preparing quickly enough, and you want to record yourself both in practice and playing points or a match, because potentially you might be preparing late in practice, or you could have a situation where you're okay in practice, but then when the point becomes live and the ball that's coming towards you is more variable, now the preparation starts to suffer and you end up being late to prepare. And if you find that you are late to prepare, then this is what you need to focus on within your practice, because until you fix late preparation, you'll never be able to develop a smooth, efficient one-handed backhand. Now, outside of late preparation, there's another major reason that players start their swing late, and this comes down to not being able to read the flight of the ball accurately enough. One of the hardest things in tennis is that every single shot you deal with is different. It travels at a slightly different speed, slightly different angle, slightly different trajectory, and then we've got different court surfaces, so the ball reacts differently off the court in a different way. Now, for a lot of players, unfortunately, their visual systems simply don't work well enough to enable them to read the subtle changes in the flight and the speed of the ball. Now, this can happen for a number of reasons, but one of the big reasons is people spend most of their time looking down at screens, and over the course of our life, the visual system starts to downregulate and doesn't function as well. The good news, though, is that you can actually train and improve how your visual system functions. Our brain actually controls our visual system, and our brain brain is plastic, which means our brain changes. So just like your vision can deteriorate if you spend your whole time looking at screens, when you train it in the right way, you can get positive plastic changes and things can go the other way, and your visual system can develop better ability to judge distance and depth and speed, which then lets you read the flight of the ball and initiate your swing at a more appropriate time. And this is something I had to do within my own game. I used to really struggle with my timing when I was younger, and it turns out I had small deficits within my visual system. I didn't realize they were going on until I started testing them, but by correcting them and working on addressing those visual deficits, I was able to develop much better timing, and because of that, a much smoother, more efficient one-handed backhand. Now, if you'd like to learn how to train your visual system, I've got a class that's going to teach you all about it, and I'll place a link to it down in the description. After late swing initiation, the next biggest challenge that prevents players from developing a smooth, efficient one-handed backhand is not being able to sequence their kinetic chain accurately enough, which is why when you watch players, it kind of looks like they're doing the right thing, but the timing and the sequencing just isn't precise enough, and that's why their shots look a little bit jerky and look a little bit clunky, and it's also why when they try and hit with power, they make way too many unforced errors. Now, the reason that players can't sequence their kinetic chain precisely enough is because they don't have good enough coordination and motor control over their body. Oddly enough, most people think that they've got great coordination, but that's because they drastically overestimate their coordination and underestimate the coordination that's required in order to have smooth, efficient tennis shots, and especially to use modern techniques efficiently. I've assessed hundreds of players over the last 5 years, and the vast majority of players have major coordination deficits throughout the body. I'm not talking small deficits, I'm talking major deficits, normally in multiple areas of the body. Especially for older players, it's very common for them to not be able to move their spine, not to be able to move their hips, not to be able to move their shoulders, not to be able to move their feet. And because of this, they're then not able to learn technique effectively. And that's why when people take lessons, they practice, they work really hard on their game, they still don't develop smooth, efficient strokes in the way that they want. Because if you can't control a specific part of the body, if it doesn't move in the way that it should, when the ball is flying at you, you don't suddenly develop the ability. So if you want to develop smoother, efficient strokes and a nicer looking one-handed backhand, you have to work on improving your underlying movement and coordination capabilities. And the great news is that this is something that you can do at any age. Just like our visual function, coordination is also controlled by our brain, and our brain is plastic. It changes in response to what training we do. So by training your brain and your body in a very specific way, you can improve your coordination, and by improving your coordination, it will then enable you to sequence your kinetic chain more precisely so that you can develop smoother strokes. Now, if you'd like to learn how to do that, I talk about it in the same class that I mentioned before. So again, I'll place a link to that down in the description below. Okay, so hopefully that all makes sense. If you want to hit a smoother one-handed backhand, you've got to understand how to use your kinetic chain effectively. You've got to get out there, you've got to practice, you've got to work on the underlying problems. So if you're preparing late, you need to focus on that. If it's another part of your stroke, you need to focus on that. But you also need to be aware that there are underlying physical prerequisites that are involved in everything that you do. And sometimes to hit the ball in the way that you want, you might need to improve how your systems function. So hopefully you've enjoyed this video. If you did, give me a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed to my channel before, it always really helps me out if you could do that as well. And if you've got any questions about anything that I've talked about here, leave me a comment down below and I'll try and respond as quickly as I can. Okay, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.